Ukrainians should not have to suffer and die because of a few corrupt individuals in the city of London and Washington. A group of opportunists has driven this conflict, similar to other wars instigated by the military-industrial complex, often influenced by powerful interests like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. NATO has essentially become a sales arm for the U.S. military-industrial complex, turning into an ineffective organization compelled to allocate parts of its budget to purchasing weapons dictated by NATO. The entire NATO narrative appears to be a criminal scam. No one, especially not Hungary or Turkey, seems willing to fight for NATO. Let's see Macron and France confront Russia. It would quickly become a losing battle for France and the rest of the EU, with the risk of Russia resorting to nuclear force. A closer look: the suffering of Ukrainians and the power dynamics behind the conflict. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has often been framed as a struggle for sovereignty, democracy, and territorial integrity. However, a deeper examination reveals a complex web of influences and interests that extend beyond the immediate geopolitical landscape. Ukrainians, tragically caught in the crossfire, should not have to suffer and die due to the machinations of a few powerful individuals and institutions in the city of London and Washington. Historical context: the military-industrial complex. To understand the current situation, it is essential to trace the historical evolution of the military-industrial complex. Coined by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in his farewell address in 1961, the term refers to the intertwined relationship between a nation's military, its government, and the industries that supply military equipment and services. Eisenhower warned of the potential for undue influence and the risks of prioritizing military spending over social needs. This concept has been relevant in numerous conflicts post-World War II. The Vietnam War, for example, saw significant involvement from defense contractors, with companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing benefiting from prolonged military engagements. Similarly, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have been criticized for being driven, in part, by the interests of the military-industrial complex. The Ukraine conflict: a confluence of interests. The conflict in Ukraine can be seen as another manifestation of these historical patterns. A group of opportunists appears to be driving this war, leveraging the situation for political and economic gain. The narrative of protecting democracy and countering aggression is often used to justify actions that align closely with the interests of powerful defense contractors and financial institutions. Influential families and groups, such as the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, have historically been linked to significant political and economic events. While direct evidence of their involvement in the Ukraine conflict might be speculative, the pattern of powerful elites influencing wars to further their interests is well documented. These families have long been associated with significant financial power and, by extension, influence over political and military decisions. NATO's role in the military-industrial complex. NATO, originally established in 1949 as a collective defense organization, has seen its role evolve, particularly after the Cold War. Critics argue that NATO has effectively become a sales arm for the U.S. military-industrial complex. Member countries are often pressured to allocate portions of their budgets to purchasing weapons and defense systems, often dictated by NATO's strategic preferences, which align closely with the interests of major U.S. defense contractors. This dynamic raises questions about the effectiveness and true purpose of NATO in the current geopolitical climate. While NATO claims to be a defensive alliance, its actions and the pressures it places on member countries suggest a more complex reality. Countries like Hungary and Turkey, for instance, have shown reluctance to fully commit to NATO's directives, reflecting broader skepticism about the alliance's direction and priorities. The European perspective: France and the EU. The suggestion that French President Emmanuel Macron and France should confront Russia highlights the delicate and dangerous nature of the conflict. The European Union, already facing internal divisions and external pressures, would find itself in a precarious position if it were to engage militarily with Russia. Such a confrontation would likely be disastrous, with Russia's significant military capabilities, including its nuclear arsenal, posing a severe threat. Historically, Europe has been the theater for devastating wars, and the prospect of another large-scale conflict on the continent is alarming. The memories of World War I and World War II are still etched in the collective consciousness, serving as stark reminders of the catastrophic consequences of war. Conclusion: a call for reflection and change. The suffering of Ukrainians should not be a pawn in the broader games of geopolitical strategy and economic gain. The influence of the military-industrial complex, powerful financial interests, and the evolving role of NATO must be critically examined. As the conflict continues, there is an urgent need for a more transparent and accountable approach to international relations, one that prioritizes human lives over profit and power. Ultimately, the hope is for a resolution that respects Ukraine's sovereignty and brings peace to the region, free from the undue influence of those who stand to benefit from continued conflict. The lessons of history should guide us toward a more just and peaceful world, where the true costs of war are borne in mind by those who wield power.